the hazy mist of the Cooley Hills, where the heavens and the earth seem to be whispering ancient secrets. There is a legend that is still whispered every time the wind passes through the old trees. The legend tells of a war, not for honor, not for territory, but just a cow, a god cow, really a cow. But don't be in a hurry to laugh, because that cow, the brown bull of Cooley, is no ordinary cow. It is a symbol of power fame and the endless rivalry between the kings and queens of air. A fantasy Ireland when mortals were in dialogue with the gods, and heroes could stand in the way of an army alone. And the man who started that strange war is Queen Medb of Connaught. A queen unlike anyone else in the Celtic epic Medb is not a fragile princess or a goddess on high. She is a true warrior, the embodiment of power, intrigue, and an ego that no one can match. Beautiful, but cold. Authority, but the desire to dominate. She didn't want to be the lady behind the throne. She wanted to be the throne herself. On a fateful night, as the moon shone in the wilderness outside cuchulainn Castle, Medb and her husband, King Ailill, had a seemingly innocuous conversation. They were comparing their possessions, from horses, chariots, gold, and silver, to their entourage. But when she counted the cows, Medb suddenly realized her husband owned a powerful white cow, and she didn't. Just a cow, but that's unacceptable. From that moment on, Medb swore with all Connaught's honor and strength that she would capture an even greater cow from Ailill. And so her eyes turned to the east, where the faraway land of Ulster was home to Ireland's most legendary cow, the brown bull of Cooley. A war is about to begin, but this is not an ordinary war. Among them are lone heroes, prophetesses, curses from the goddess of time, and even cuchulainn, a teenage warrior who will single-handedly fight the entire Medb army in a series of unique battles that will shock history. And tonight you will be taken back to that land. Close your eyes, relax your mind, and let this sound take you through time, where the Celtic stars are brighter than campfires, where the narrative becomes magical, and where the legend of Queen Medb and the Cattle Raid of Cooley comes alive as air's own beat. In the splendid castle of Connaught on a misty morning when the sun had not yet shone on the fields, winding like the waves of the sea. In the distance Medb, the proud and wise queen, and Ailill the co-king rested on a bed covered with fine silk. They are not dreaming, but talking. A seemingly harmless conversation, but it shook the destiny of the whole land of Ireland. Ailill, with a slight smile and sly eyes, whispered that he thought he was richer than Medb. The queen, who had never been behind anyone, laughed softly and then retorted, "No, I am the superior." So they began to count cows, horses, slaves, armor pearls, precious wine. For every item Ailill raises, Medb has an equivalent, sometimes even superior. But when it comes to the cow, Ailill mentions the muscular white cow named Finnbenach, the man with white horns. A vivid wonder, unmatched Medb bit his lip lightly. That's what she doesn't have, and unacceptable. With the pride of a queen who had been blessed by the gods, she quietly swore that if her husband owned a legendary cow, she would find another equal or more. And that name began to appear in the maps in the dreams, and then etched in her mind Don Cuchulainn, the cow of Cooley, who lived in the eastern lands in Ulster. A pitch-black creature with a glow of fire in its eyes is said to be a descendant of a god. That night, the cold moonlight shone through the doorway, reflecting on Medb's brilliant hair. She couldn't sleep. Not for love, not for war, but for something deeper honor. She decided she would take the cow at all costs. When the dew season had not yet dissipated on the Connaught steppe, Medb summoned warlords, generals, and warriors from all over Western Ireland. The sound of imprisonment and echoes throughout the land is silent spreading, like an ancient music awakened from a long sleep. She didn't call them with threats, not with weapons, but with a promise. You will enter the legend. At Fort Rathcrogan, which is said to be the gateway to the other world, the army gathered like waves before the storm. There were knights wearing indigo robes from the distant mountains. There were magicians carrying meandering staffs made of sacred wood. And there were young warriors who had never set foot on the battlefield, but their eyes were full of longing to prove themselves. And beside Medb, it was always Ailil, although his eyes sometimes flashed with wonder at his wife's bold decision. But Medb didn't waver. She wore a silver crown, rode a jet-black horse, and held a staff with a winding Celtic dragon head. Each of her movements was a dance, slow but powerful, as if dancing with fate. They set off at dawn. The blood-red sun set behind them as the army headed east toward the Cooley region. The golden meadows stretched endlessly. The smell of heather and cypress grass fell with every horse's step, like invisible letters signaling a journey that could not be turned back. Little did they know that the eastern land had been protected by an ancient curse, that in the most critical of times, the Ulster men would be paralyzed by a divine pain that lasted 9 days and 9 nights. Only one person was not affected, but Medb doesn't believe in bad omens. She believed in the plan, in the strategy, and in Fergus MacRoish. Fergus, the exiled king from Ulster, now a general under Medb, is the guide, the living map of the Cooley region. What used to be his hometown is now the target of the person he used to call a friend. As the army crossed the Shannon River, clouds gathered to create strange shapes in the sky. Some say it's a good omen. The gods are watching. Some say it's a sign that chaos is approaching. But Medb did not falter. She didn't go for the spoils. She went to affirm something more sacred, the right to decide fate. In the land between Connaught and Ulster, they stopped at an empty plateau where the wind whistled like the whispers of the ancient fairies. Medb stood on a stone slab, holding up a piece of silk embroidered with the image of Don Quailunge, as if to declare to the whole world, from here the legend begins. Far to the east, where the Ulster jungle meets the Sea of Mist, the boy with blue-black hair and eyes like the water of a deep lake, the cuchulainn owl, was practicing alone in the foggy meadow. He was the son of the god Lugh and the princess Deichtainn, and had 2 bloodlines, mortal and divine. His body was as soft as a silk strip, but as hard as steel. His footsteps are as gentle as a wild deer, but each turn is as fast as thunder. In an instant, he was able to swing his javelin through 2 tree trunks spaced apart from each other. Cuchulainn is unlike anyone else in Ulster. He was the only one not affected by Macha's curse. Legend has it that Macha, the goddess of war and childbirth, was forced to run during her pregnancy. Because of this cruelty, she cursed the men of Ulster in the event of hostilities. They would suffer labor pains for 9 days and nights unable to move. Only those who were not present that day, like the cuchulainn owl, were not affected. And now, when the curse engulfed the castle of Emin Macha, the Ulster warriors groaned in pain like bound souls. And there was only one man standing the boy, who was not yet 17 years old. The sound of the horses' hooves of the Connaught army echoed in the distance like a battle drum rumbling in the wind. But for Cuchulainn, it was like the heartbeat of fate calling his name. He climbed up the hill near Lake Nebreg, where the water was as calm as a silver mirror, and looked west. Thousands of spears glittered in the afternoon light, drawing a river of steel flowing back to his hometown. There was no fear in Cuchulainn's heart, only accept. Because since childhood, he has been taught that the destiny of a hero is not to avoid danger, but to accept it as if he were embracing a dance, both beautiful, painful, and irresistible. Before leaving, he bowed his head in front of the stone altar placed in the middle of the forest. On it, a nettle branch is inserted into a wooden bowl, a symbol of fragile life and the power of rebirth. The wind rises and the leaves of the grass fly in a vortex as if someone is whispering, "You are the chosen one." The Cuchulainn rode on a black horse named Liath Macha, born from the sea, and pulled out the Gai Bolg Puritan forged from the bones of the god shark at the bottom of Lake Cetus. No one ever survived after this spear was launched, but he wasn't proud, only quiet. He walked alone towards the enemy, one against thousands. But that's why his name was carved into the stone, and his story was told in the long night. And so the confrontation began. When the Cuchulainn owl arrives at the trail that leads into the Cooley region, the sunset is receding as the last breath of the day. Throughout the field, the mist rose from the ground, wrapping around the young grass like strips of silver silk. Against the background of the deep purple sky, the crows flew back to the nest and made silent noises signaling the coming storm. Not of the wind, but of fate. Not far away, Queen Medb's Connaught army was preparing to set up camp, having just finished a long march. They didn't expect that waiting for them in front, it was just a lonely teenager. He didn't build a fortress. No trenches, only 3 wooden pillars stand tall in the middle of the road. The traditional barrier of Ulster warriors, a sacred symbol that says, "Whoever passes without permission will have to fight." Medb, who was sitting in a white fox fur-lined palanquin, received the news. She laughed. A teenager alone blocking the way of an army. Does he think we're acting out a mythical play? But Ail, her husband, frowned. Not all teenagers are teenagers. If he is the Cuchulainn owl, then every step he takes can rewrite the entire epic. Medb smiled faintly. Then I'll test his skills. And so she sent one of her most skilled warriors, Nath Crantail, who had killed 3 Western Sea Chiefs to try to break the shield. Cuchulainn stood still, his hand resting lightly on the spear of Gai Bolg. As Nath approached, the wind stopped blowing. Breathless space. "Get out!" Nath shouted. "Children shouldn't play with weapons." Cuchulainn didn't answer. He just raised his hand, gently, pulling the rope between the 3 wooden poles. In that moment, the earth seemed to shake beneath Nath's feet. Not because of magic, because divine spirit. Nath rushed up, but the Cuchulainn owl only lifted 1 step, as graceful as a swallow gliding through the water, and then launched the spear. It didn't pierce the heart, but pierced the hilt of the shield, digging deep into the ground right in front of Nath's feet. Not a drop of blood, but it was not a step forward. Nath paused, then fell to the knees. Not because of the injury, but because of the trembling heart. In front of him, the boy was not a person, but a warning of fate. Medb heard the news, not angry nor panicked. She pondered, "Then every day I will send him a warrior. If he wins, I won't advance. If you lose, the road is open." That night, the moon rose like a mirror illuminating the river Sidia, flowing along the border. Cuchulainn sat by the small fire, nibbling on a piece of dry barley cake. In the distance, the sound of the horses' hooves and the brass trumpets of the Connaught army still echoed. But where he sat, it was a different world. The world of silence where heroes are alone, writing legends by every breath. And so the war between a man and an army began with silence. The next morning, before the fog had cleared the sound of prisoners, and from the Connaught camp tore through the quiet air, it was a signal the next warrior would come forward, determined to break down Ulster's barrier and confront Cuchulainn. His name was Irk MacCairpree, who had trained at the battlefield of Scathach, the legendary female martial arts master, who was also the master of Cuchulainn himself. The encounter between the two disciples was now a twisted fate. In the middle of the cloud-covered valley, two young men stepped out. No drums, no prisons. They bowed to each other in the reverence of real warriors. Irk opened the words first. "We used to train under the same roof of the dojo. I didn't come for hate, but for honor." Cuchulainn just smiled sadly. "And I'm standing here because of my oath to defend my country alone." When the two rushed into each other, there was no sound of swords colliding, no loud sounds. It's just that the two bodies are wrapped around each other like the wind swirling around the top of the mountain, flexible, full of internal strength. The young grass beneath their feet was swept away, not because of violence, but because of the ethereal majesty of the pure art of fighting. Eventually, Cuchulainn dropped the Irk weapon, but he didn't kill him. Just stick the sword on the ground and say, "Go back. Not all wars need to end in loss." Irk, emotional, nodded and retreated, leaving a soft trace of legend, a bloodless match in which both sides grew out of benevolence and dignity. But not everyone is like Irk. The next day, Liagar Boadash stepped forward, a notorious warrior jealous of the reputation of the Cuchulainn owl. He didn't say anything, just tore the barrier with the blade of an axe. Cuchulainn owl walked out his expression, no longer smiling. This match did not last long. Because when Liagar tried to stab Cuchulainn just leaned over, dodged, and threw a counterattack with his spear, lifeless but enough for him to lose consciousness. There were no injuries, but no one in the Connaught camp dared to step up again that day. Just like that for 2 weeks every day, a warrior every night, a new story was woven around the fire about the lonely boy in the Valley of Fog, defeating each legend elegantly as if dancing in a dream. Later on, the warriors came out even more formidable, from the giants of the Connemara region to the hermit gods of the south. But Cuchulainn stood his ground, for he did not fight to win, but to keep his promise. Even one night, Morrigan, the goddess of war, appeared in the darkness, testing him with illusions, with black birds with blind fire. But he was not afraid, because his heart belonged to Ulster, and a man who kept his oath could not be shaken by any illusion. In the frosty field of Cooley, where the sound of swords and spears once sounded, there was now only a gentle breeze passing through the silver-headed grasses. The Cuchulainn owl, whose body was disintegrating, and the blood in his body seemed to have drained after many consecutive matches, was still standing there in the middle of the fateful crossroads. In front of him, Medb was no longer a powerful queen, but a tired figure covered in a robe stained with road dust and rain and wind. They looked at each other, not by hatred, but by understanding. Medb gained the god cow, Don Quailingay, but at the cost of thousands of lives and a kingdom divided. Cuchulainn had defended Ulster, but his heart was broken with loss. Because his friend had laid down, and because the very ideals he had believed in were now stained with blood. Medb raised his hand, signaling to retreat. Without a word, her eyes had a strange tenderness. Perhaps she saw something in the boy, a reflection of herself when she was young, when she was dreamy and idealistic. Then Connacht's army returned. The war ended. There was no triumph, no funeral. There is only a prolonged silence on the land that was once a battlefield. Don Quailnge, the god cow, did not live long after returning to Connacht. It let out a final roar, then lay down as if engraving a legend into the ground. It is said that every time the autumn wind blows through the Irish hills, Medb's sigh is still heard somewhere. Not because she lost the battle, but because she understood the cost of power and greed. And every time the full moon shines on Cooley, people say they see the figure of a young warrior sitting on a rock, silently looking west, where the old heart once vibrated with idealism and sorrow. And that story, even though it has been tinged with the smoke of time, is still whispered through generation after generation. If you love Celtic fairy tales, Irish epics, and enchantingly tender legends, like this video, subscribe to not miss the next journey, and share the video to those you know who will join us. Stories like this deserve to be revived with the heart by the imagination and by the soft light of the voice told at night.